All right, everybody. Welcome to our next episode here. I'm here today joined by Christian Moore at Concentric. In his current role, he's the Vice President of Risk Consulting. And as we'll get into in the end of the discussion, is he also wears the primary hat of being the climate lead within the company, both kind of within a risk construct, but also beyond that. So we'll talk about that more. Christian, really great to have you join me today.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, it's nice to be asked, and I hope I can bring some value in talking about our particular journey as a company and me as an individual.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first question is, could you tell me just a little bit more about who you are? Your background. Obviously, we talked about your job title, but like anything that makes you who you are is what I want to know about.
Yeah, sure. I mean, first and foremost, I'm a Brit, as I hope you can still tell. I've been in the States for 17 years now, but holding on to my accent with regular viewings of Downton Abbey just to polish it up. And I was in the military in the UK for 20 years. I was in the British Marines for 10 of those years, and then our Special Forces for the final 10 of those years. And then I sort of transitioned into initially corporate intelligence and then corporate security as a career. So I've been a consultant really since I left the military. Phases with an alcohol company in Asia, where I was doing business intelligence. Then I had about 6 years with a focus on oil and gas out of Houston, managing their risk. And then when I moved up to Seattle and discovered Concentric, we've had a focus. I have a focus there on private, family, and corporate risk management. And yeah, I think that's what 37 years since I was 19 of thinking about risk in one way or another, and I find that it's personally appeals to me as an area of interest, and can't really imagine doing anything else. And so when as I became, well, certainly I'll go back to, I spent a lot of time in the jungle during my military times. I think 3 months in total, if I added it all together, that I was deep in the trees, both in Brunei in Indonesia and then in Belize. And I'll be frank that I had very little appreciation for the nature that was around me. I look back at that time now and just how precious it was as an experience to be dropped by helicopters just deep into, prime forest and old growth trees, and seeing things that are sort of untouched other than us camouflaged humans roaming around, training, in jungle warfare. And it wasn't really until I met my American wife that I began to give any thought whatsoever to the environment. She had trained as an environmental biologist initially, and as I courted her, I realized I probably needed to have something to say on that front. So I threw in a few white lies about how beautiful it had been in the forest and in the jungles. But it really wasn't until my current boss dispatched me down to Belize to do some pro bono consulting for a group of forest rangers there that I really joined the dots between my interest in risk and the need to protect nature. And so since then, it's become probably my driving passion.
I really love that story. It's also interesting. Every so often, you meet a veteran that's in this space, and so it's interesting to see how your identity. Do you think of yourself? You spent 20 years in the service, so I would imagine you do think of yourself as a veteran.
Yeah, I do. I think it's in the US, veteran status is somewhat different. The whole, thank you for your service is something I've had to get used to. I feel extremely lucky to have had 20 years being paid to, roam around doing interesting stuff, and I don't feel any need for thanks. But I do. I have now 4 teenagers, 2 of whom are themselves orienting towards the military, and I'm quite happy with that, although I'm not pushing them. But I just think there's no better start in a young life than any form of service, whether it's military service or otherwise. And I'm just very grateful. It set me up both with a sense of responsibility, and it gave me a card to put on the table when I was looking for other jobs. And still today, then I don't dwell on my being a veteran, but I do find that when it comes out in conversation, it's a point of interest, becomes a point of pride as you realize that other people are grateful for what you did, maybe impressed by
Yeah,
what you
I in my own kind of experience as a veteran, I feel that way as well, which is just like I lived an incredible life for years. And my country made great investments in me as a person. And so
Mike, I don't even think I knew that you were a veteran.
Yeah, I used to fly F-18s for the U.S. Navy.
Blimey. I was at a wine tasting a couple of weekends ago and got introduced to a very haggard-looking fellow who was in construction, and he looked like he'd been building, houses in the valley here for decades. And I said, "Have you always done this?" He said, "No, I flew fast jets off aircraft carriers for 12 years before this." I forget what he flew precisely, but yeah, thank you for your service, Mike. I love that, veterans are finding their way into this space. And I know I've a significant network of veterans who are in or looking to find something useful to do in the environmental protection space.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think primarily it is this. It broadens your perspective to join the military, both in terms of the part that you are playing in a much broader strategic role for your country. They send you to interesting places, so you get mind expanded there. We all will have useful memories that serve as benchmarks of places we've been where people live very different lives. And that's always made me feel grateful for the place that I was born into, the circumstances that I was born into. And I think, you get exposed to that as a young person. And the values that US and UK military strive to instill in you, I think they leave you, and I'm going to swear now, giving an F,
Yeah.
Caring is a bit of a soppy, sensitive word, but giving an F is something that I think you find all veterans come out with just instilled in them. And then I think that sense of risk and security is instilled in anyone who's served. And so I think in the current times, and this maybe wouldn't have been the same in previous decades, but in the current times, you cannot avoid awareness of the threat from environmental destruction and changes in the climate. And so if that sense of security and risk is instilled in you, you're going to, I think, you'll see some natural alignment between things that you care about and are good at and things that need doing. My biggest frustration, and we'll probably get onto this, is finding a way to get paid to do that. You've done a good job, sir, at that. I'm still trying to figure it out for myself, but I feel that I'm slowly closing in on what doesn't exist right now, which is an environmental security industry that isn't non-profit. It's commercially driven. It's going to attract, veterans for sure, young people who care, and I'm excited to be, potentially at the forefront of that.
I would argue that you are. I couldn't have said that better myself as well. Like I think you and I are of very similar minds about why I was attracted to this work it sounds similar to you, why um, I think others in our background are attracted as well. Can you tell me a little bit more about just give the viewers a little bit of a background about what Concentric does, and then specifically why is Concentric concerned about sustainability and climate? Like it wouldn't necessarily seem to be an obvious connection.
Yeah. So, I mean, Concentric is a security company. Um, uh, that includes the need for intelligence in order to deliver security. So, security and intelligence are the two main areas that we deal in. Our clients range from private individuals, families, family offices, corporates, and non-profits. And our stated mission is manage risk to keep people safe everywhere. And by that, we're talking geography, and we're talking physical and cyber. And the company's been around for around 12 years, I would say, and has grown to be the biggest security company on the West Coast. This is, let's say, security consultancy, because I'll differentiate us from the large sort of guarding companies. But as far as privately owned security consultancy, we are have grown to be the biggest on the West Coast, and we're operating globally. And I think it was 2017 when our founder, Roderick Jones, who also happens to be a Brit, residing in San Francisco, he himself was a former special branch police officer in the UK. He just, through sitting at a dinner in London next to someone from the Police High Commission, came up with this opportunity for Concentric to go and have a look at what these rangers and police were doing in the Chickabull National Park, which is one of the biggest in Belize, and it's on the border with Guatemala. And they had a lot of cross-border incursions into that national park for illegal logging, gold mining, illegal wildlife trade. So that was fascinating for me to go back into the trees, as we used to call it, and I spent a week with the rangers there, up there on the border. Fascinating working with non-profit rangers dressed in camo and carrying AR-15s, wearing camouflage cream. It was almost alarming to see that sort of juxtaposition of non-profit conservation and a military role. They shared it with the Police Defence Force, but it was a very militarized approach, and there was no doubt that the conclusion they expected was that you need, better camouflaged uniforms, you need more powerful weapons, you need all of the military tools of the trade that you don't have in order to combat this problem. But I actually came away with realizing that what they really lack is situational awareness, or what we came to call domain awareness. So if you take a group of rangers who've got responsibility for a national park, it was a lot of real estate to keep an eye on. Impossible to do without surveillance technology, essentially, and they weren't using that. They were picking areas of the forest, maybe picking up on a lead from a local community, and then they were making long patrols into these areas up by the border, trying to find people doing things they shouldn't be doing. And it sometimes culminated in armed exchanges with people getting shot and in some cases dying. All of which seemed to me somewhat unnecessary, and what was lacking was something that we do use in the military, which is domain awareness, which you can achieve through space observation from satellites and through ground-based sensors. There was a whole range of things that were familiar to me from my military days that could usefully be applied here in a similar situation where you've got a small group of people trying to protect a large piece of real estate that by its nature, by its forested nature, it's difficult to see what's going on. So I came back and just did a bit of Googling to find out if anyone was doing anything relating to this. And I did. I found some fascinating advances have been made in satellite monitoring, the use of drones, evolutions in camera traps, seismic sensors, and most excitingly for the forest, acoustic sensors. And I've subsequently ended up, climbing 100 feet up into the canopy of Belize to help install phenomenal acoustic sensors that run off solar power for 4 years before they need any serious maintenance. And they are just continually sucking up all of the acoustic data within a square mile of this sensor, and then using AI to process that acoustic data to differentiate between natural sounds and human-made sounds, whether it's a vehicle or a gunshot or voice. Somewhere that there shouldn't be a human. These sensors will hear that. They're working on triangulation so they can be more accurate about, but they certainly are immediately notified that within this square mile, there is the sound of a chainsaw, for example. So that helps the rangers go where they're needed, and maybe they go slightly better prepared than they would do if they just bumped into the illegal logging event. Quite fascinatingly, I found the team, they're called Rainforest Connection. I'll give them a plug here, rfcx.org. They are on about the third or fourth generation of these acoustic sensors. They brought a bioacoustic team of scientists into their fold along the way, and they realized through machine learning that the acoustic signature of a chainsaw is like just 1 decibel different from that of a howler monkey. So the alerts the sensors kept triggering when they heard the howler monkey, and they'd go there and there was no chainsaw activity, no evidence of it, and then they began to realize, and so now the AI understands the difference, even though it's very fine difference between the two. So fascinating application of technology. We ended up doing a pilot down in Belize, and proved that can be really useful. My constant struggle is to find the bandwidth and the way to have that paid for to do it more expansively. But certainly along the way, so I had the support of our founder then, and we all, I think, at the same time realized this very natural link between a security risk consultancy and the risk that we all face from not protecting those forests down in Belize. So it's a fascinating risk model when you think about at the ground level. You've got the loss of biodiversity, the loss of captured carbon, the loss of blood as people confront each other over the protection of these carbon assets, and this biodiversity. You then had Belize and Guatemala actually, saber rattling at each other over these cross-border insurgents. No doubt that the pilfering from this particular forest was happening, was part of a chain moving through Central America to feed us our cheap lumber. And then you've got the impact on climate change of those events down in Central America are directly impacting me, my kids, their future, everyone in our company. I mean, it's an inescapable risk, and probably the greatest one that we all face together. And there was just this joining of dots in my mind, in the mind of our company's leadership, that it just made complete sense. It made so much more sense that a company like ours would get more directly involved on the front lines than it would if we were making, I don't know, car tires and trying to reduce the environmental and climate impact of that, that production of that product. And so, we feel a sense of purpose that we really ought to. Now that we've seen that, we really need to do something about it, and get more directly involved.
I think that's an incredibly vivid story, and talking about quite literally being on the front lines of environmental destruction and climate change makes it very personal. And I appreciated hearing that from you. It's definitely something that I've talked about a little bit as well, which is that climate is the number one threat multiplier to the international security order out there. And it's the sort of thing that if we let it get out of control, security itself will get out of control. And so it's both like in the short-term risk and the kind of the longer-term risk that you see here. So I love this discussion about risk, environmental destruction, and security.
No, I could. As soon as you said threat multiplier, which for us military people is second language, but I hadn't included that in my off the top of my head list there. But that when I think about Belize and I think about Central America and I think about environmental degradation there, I think about the increased prevalence of hurricanes and weather events that are making it a struggle, more of a struggle to earn a living down there. There are other factors at play, of course, but just the environmental factors are driving people north to perceive, safety and a better way of living up here. So I really feel that there is important work to be done down there. We ideally would have those people stay there, and we would pay them to do the important work that's required to help us, but also, help themselves, down there on the equator, facing those most direct impacts, the earliest impacts, I think, of climate change. So there's something in that, I think, that I'm striving towards. The big question is, where do you find the money to fund all this?
Sure. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. So, this is, it's an internal project here. It sounds like if I had to guess here, the person that usually brings up that there's a problem gets tasked to be the one to solve it.
Yes.
So it sounds like that's kind of how you got to this. How did you deal with this internally? How did you convince leadership and other, of your colleagues to work on this?
Well, I mean, the origin story of Concentric doing anything around sustainability was not that experience in Belize. Just prior to that, and very conveniently, our number one client, which is a family office, the principal of that family was taking a significant interest in climate, and had written a book that was going to be his entry into the discussion on climate. And the family office reached out to all vendors to just a sort of a finger in the air to see what, if anything, was being done by vendors to the family to around sustainability. And so the literal question to our leadership was, what does green security look like? And I, at the time, my title was Director of Special Projects. And I'd just come back from Belize. And, in order to secure the attention of my wife, had become a faux tree hugger. And so for all those reasons, it came to me to answer that question. What does green security look like for this company? So there was buy-in from the top at the outset. We needed to answer that question, and we did it through joining the Green Business Bureau, which I believe is now called the Green Business Benchmark, and working through their platform to identify opportunities for us to reduce our environmental footprint, office recycling, composting, low energy lighting, power strips, a volunteer day, all sorts of initiatives that you could complete in return for points and elevate up through their tiered structure. So we're actually now 5 years later, a platinum member of the Green Business Benchmark, as it's now called. We're also on the Members Advisory Council. We were one of their earlier sign-ups, and I started asking lots of difficult questions like, do you guys do anything around carbon, for example? And they didn't. So I was invited to join the Members Advisory Council, and there are 10 companies that have a representative on that. We meet quarterly. And they now have a carbon component to being a green business within the Green Business Benchmark. So, but prior to that, I identified that we're covering the environmental impact of the company through GBB, but we're not addressing the carbon footprint. And again, 5 years ago, that was, even the use of the term carbon footprint to leadership met with quizzical looks. But one of the earlier movers on this was Amazon, and they established, along with the non-profit, must not blank on this, Global Optimism, led by Cristina Figueira, who was the architect of the Paris Climate Agreement. She got together with Jeff Bezos, and they established the Climate Pledge. We, I think, were the 200th signatory. I think they're up to 500 or 600 now. The sports arena in Seattle is now Climate Pledge Arena. And actually, my water bottle here.
There you go.
Made by our local company, MIR, MIIR, who presented at a recent Climate Pledge gathering. They make water bottles and other liquid containers using half as much metal as the typical product, and they are signatories. So we signed the Climate Pledge, which is essentially you commit to accounting for your carbon footprint, reducing where you can, offsetting with high quality offsets, the unavoidable emissions, and then reporting all of that publicly. We have, we've done everything except publicly reporting, but we're doing that this year for the first time. We have until 2030. But our own goal for net zero is the end of 2025. We're definitely on track for that, and might even be able to accelerate it. But that the Climate Pledge was a perfect framework for us. I mean, happy to tell you that Amazon is one of our clients, and so there was a lot of alignment there, and that's been our vehicle for starting our carbon accounting journey, which of course led us to me talking to you, Mike.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's switch topics, or switch gears just slightly here, which is, what do you find exciting about working on climate? Or what do you think is a total headache?
So I don't know whether you ever ejected from your jet, Mike.
No, thankfully. I would be about an inch shorter if that had happened. So right. I'm glad to not have done that.
Yeah, I did a lot of parachuting. Sometimes into the sea at night. It's very exciting, but it's also quite terrifying. I actually have a fear of heights that I had to overcome throughout my career. And yeah, when I think about climate, it's terrifying. And certainly in the context of how fast things are changing, how those models were all inaccurate in their estimation of when things would really start to change. And yeah, I've got 4 teenagers who are going to be living in that world for a good while longer than me. So it feels very deep down scary to contemplate what the world is going to look like in 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time. Even if we do a lot of good stuff, it's going to be a very different world to the one that you and I grew up in. So that worries me. But I also, with that, the whole thing I find quite exhilarating because it's happening now. Ours is the generation that has the imperative to do something about it, or not do enough. When I was at there was a climate pledge summit for signatories to gather in New York. We, of course, all offset our flights. John Kerry spoke there and was very impressive. I see he's now relinquishing that role. But the most impactful speaker for me was Jay Inslee, who's the governor of Washington State. And he made a point that really stuck in my head, and it was a quote from Winston Churchill in October 41, and he was talking to his old school, Marlborough School in the UK, and he referred to what were they, 2 years into the Second World War, 3 years from its conclusion, but by then he'd managed to get the Americans support, and things were somewhat turning around from a backs to the wall situation. But he referred to, in his speech to these school kids, as these are great days, which surprised some people. It became a headline at the time. But what he meant was these are days of incredible significance and importance. And he went on to say, we are lucky to be a part of tackling these great challenges, and in so doing, reorienting the course of history, as they did with the Second World War, and as we need to do with tackling climate change. So yeah, Jay Inslee left us with that. These are great days, scary but significant, and people like you and me, Mike, have the opportunity to be there at the pivotal moment, getting stuck in and turning things around if it's possible.
Yeah, I love that. These are interesting times, but they're times of great import. In some ways, you could say that the next 20 years are potentially the most impactful in all of human history. And so, I feel fortunate to be able to help to do my part to steer it the direction I think it needs to go.
Churchill also said, never, ever, ever give up. It was in the same speech to these school kids. But of course, the whole world heard it, and they remember that quote in particular. But that I draw some strength from as I keep looking for the open door to getting more involved in the frontline work. I know it's there. I'm banging on all sorts of different doors, but I'll find the one that's open through not giving up. But yeah, exciting times.
I think it was the IPCC said that every degree counts, every decision matters, and every year matters.
Absolutely.
And that's where we're at. What's something that you've learned about climate on this journey that you wish everybody knew?
I mean, I've learned a heck of a lot for sure. I still defer to you on some of the technicalities of carbon accounting. Still can't fully get my head around Scope 3 emissions, but I figure I don't need to because you understand that. But the thing, I think it's the incredible power potential of technology to help us protect the natural world, because there just aren't enough boots on the ground to do it effectively. There never will be. The scale is going to be achieved through existing and fast evolving technology, sensor technology, space-based and ground-based. As I told you about those acoustic sensors, I mean, you're in this world, and it seemed apparent that you weren't aware of these acoustic sensors and what they can do, and I'm probably already out of date because it's so fast moving. It's really uplifting technology is clearly not the solution for everything, but I think in this particular case, when we're looking at environmental protection, it's staggering how much more we could be doing with existing technology that is progressing very fast. And so, yeah, I wish more people knew about that, because they might be more inclined to support the expansion of that effort.
100%. There are definitely within remote sensing, both as you talk about space-based acoustic sensors, et cetera. That is a rapidly evolving field, and it's certainly within the space of carbon offsets as well. It's also changing how we measure and verify carbon offset production. It's interesting. If you had 10 times the budget that you have now, what would you do differently?
What would I do with $10? Interesting. No, Concentric is very generous in support. I don't worry about whether we can afford to do the right thing here. But if I had 10 times the budget, I think I would certainly be expanding that pilot that I did in Belize, and using our own money to invest in the proof of the concept of weaving together this surveillance system with all of its various sensor components, and show just how powerful it can be. And I think the other thing that I would do, certainly from a point of view of buying high quality offsets, I would with 10 times the budget, apportion some decent percentage of that to novel ideas that are still in development, that hopefully will derive future credits. And in that realm, I'm thinking about two companies specifically that I'm fascinated by. One is called Seaweed Generation. They are in the Caribbean. They've developed surface drones that are collecting sargassum before it lands on Caribbean beaches and creates a toxic atmosphere and ruins the local tourist industry. And they are scooping this up like a big surface fish. And when they get to a certain weight, the drone deep dives and takes it down below 1,000 feet, I think, which is where the seaweed, the air pockets are completely burst or just flattened to the point where they're no longer buoyant. And then they release this sargassum, and instead of landing on a beach, it lands on the seabed and gets eaten by fish. And they film it. The whole thing is filmed with cameras. So they're still in the prototype stage, and I've spoken to them directly. And buying an offset from them is more expensive than it is buying from forest protection in Brazil, which we currently do. But I've had more money, I would definitely place more bets on companies like that. The other one is, you may have heard of Running Tide. And actually, I was aware of them a couple of years ago. They were seeding lines in the ocean with sugar kelp. And then when the lines with sensors on them got to a certain weight, with the kelp, of course, it grows through sucking, to some extent, through sucking carbon out of the atmosphere. Very quantifiable. And then they would sink this line, similar to the Seaweed Generation, they'd sink this kelp to the floor for seafood. I see now they've evolved onto carbon buoys. I call them buoys still, carbon buoys, that are made from wood. So they grow wood to pull carbon out of the atmosphere, and then they turn that wood into buoys with sensors in them, and they seed that with sugar kelp, and they cast them out and follow them wherever they go, and they just pull carbon out of the atmosphere, more carbon, to attach to the wood that stored its carbon. You then grow the kelp around it, and when it gets to a certain weight, it deep dives for fish food. And that's all captured by video as well. So you've got that sort of evidentiary chain. Those sorts of things fascinate me and excite me. And when you think of scale at which they could be done, the potential for them, it's very uplifting. And I wish if I had more money, I would buy more of their credits to help them along that development process.
Yeah, I think that's. I know Running Tide, for example, has had some kind of early funding through Stripe and some of their work around that, and so that's definitely important work. We work with a preferred partner, an outfit called CNOT that does offset curation. Essentially, they buy the offsets for you.
Okay.
And part of their portfolio is to invest some part of their offset buy into these emerging technologies, which aren't at scale yet, and so like it can never be like the bulk of your portfolio, but they are definitely an important part about where we go.
Yeah, I think when Concentric, and really it's this year that we are going to be closing in on net zero, and I think I want to do that with a portfolio approach, and I want to have some portion, even within our existing budget, some portion of that to be looking at these future methodologies for capturing carbon. Because it's important to do it, but also there's just a great story there. It's fascinating stuff. We produce an internal Green Team newsletter, and I've referred to these types of opportunities before, and you can just see faces light up. This is kind of cool stuff that we can be a part of. I don't know whether I have mentioned, but we've seen a really profound impact of our sustainability efforts supporting recruitment and retention, particularly among, are we allowed to say millennials? I think so. But plenty of young people that I work with on my Green Team, part of their continuing desire to work for Concentric is that they've seen on our website before they were recruited that we're talking about the things that we do, and then they get here and find we're actually doing them, and that they can be a part of that. We've had great feedback from our HR team that it's one of the things they ask about the most, and then I feel it, within our Green Team and broader interest from the company when we brief out that they like belonging to a company that is involved in this and involved in a way that is genuine and as far from greenwashing as we can possibly get.
100%. Would you say that it's helped you with employee retention?
Absolutely. For the same reason. Because it's certainly in our space, there aren't many people, there aren't many other companies who are thinking this way. There are some. Actually, when we looked into the climate pledge, I sorted the filter out to see if there was any other security industry company that had signed the pledge, and there was a Spanish man guarding company called Prosegur. If you've heard of G4S or Guard a World, they're the sort of Spanish version of these very, very big companies whose guards you will see across all sorts of facilities and sites. And they were Spanish, but they served the South American market, and then they entered the US market, having signed the climate pledge. Now, I haven't looked into whether they're doing it properly. I think the EU will certainly be looking into whether their claims are genuine. I like to think that they are, but what's really interesting is that there's another massive American security company called Securitas that just announced its scientific-based targets. And that was the first I'd heard that they were doing anything. And I'm almost certain it's in response to their Spanish competitor who'd entered the US market, tackling their carbon footprint. So that's really interesting for me. We're not aware of any other medium-sized consultancies that have done what we've done, but we make a fair bit of noise about it in marketing. I like to think that it helps generate interest and maybe new business, but we also would love it if all of our competitors did something themselves. That's how we're going to unlock the full potential of business to tackle this problem.
How interesting is it? A competitive edge that you want to lose?
Yeah, I mean,
because of your personal ethos, right?
yeah, no, but also, I mean, we got a head start for sure, and you know, making a commitment is one thing, and then fulfilling it is another. It might well level the, we've got this extra cost of being green. The ROI on that is currently difficult for us to determine. I found it quite fascinating to see climate pledge signatories, big companies, who ask us, send us an RFP to make a proposal for a piece of business, and I'm scouring, the latter pages, waiting for them to ask us what we're doing around carbon. And up until very recently, I was not being asked that. I wasn't being asked that by the biggest company in the world who signed the climate pledge. And I got to speak to some of their procurement people at the gathering, and I said, I've just done, in the last month, 2 RFPs for you. And neither of them asked me if I'm doing anything around carbon. How on earth are you supposed to leverage the power of your net zero aspirations without, actively cleaning up your supply chain? They said that they would do something about that, so we shall see. But the first company that asked us was a Chinese company. It was like, bingo, finally. Tell us, are you accounting for your carbon footprint? And can we see the evidence of that, please? We don't yet know whether we've won that business, but I like to think that if we do, it's because we're almost certainly the only people in our industry who are doing that and can prove it with hard evidence.
I'll have to follow up with you on that. Let's try something a little different here. What's a status quo that you reject?
My son wants to be a teacher, and my instinct is that that's such a valuable job, but you're not going to be very well paid. I may be incorrect on that, but that's my layperson's perspective of the teaching industry. Incredibly important to society, but that's just not reflected in remuneration. And that makes me think of forest defenders in particular. The rangers I was dealing with in Belize were, not surprisingly, poorly paid, poorly equipped, no benefits, and yet doing a job that is so vital to all of us. So I would challenge the status quo that frontline environmental defenders need to remain impoverished. It makes me think also of payment for environmental services. That's, conceptually, that would be a wonderful way of directing capital to worthy efforts to protect the environment and to acknowledge that, the trees to clean our air and the value of clean water. I know there's some clever people still haven't figured out how you get someone to pay for that. The value of a blue whale. I saw someone had calculated, if we had to pay them for doing what they do, they'd be pretty well off. So yeah, the status quo of not rewarding people who are engaged in incredibly important work. I'd like to challenge that.
It's an unfortunate part of our system about how things that provide social benefit and meaning to life are chronically undervalued. All right, last question. If you were going to write a book, what would it be about?
So, yeah, I saw this question and I thought, you'll be surprised. I've written 2 books.
Okay.
Neither of which have been published because I haven't submitted them. The first book I wrote, when I left my 20 years in the military, I wanted to be a writer. My wife was working in Brazil, leading college kids on environmental tours of Brazil. So I went, handed over my squadron one day, and the next day I stopped shaving and plugged into a group of Antioch College kids, most of whom were barefooted and literally tree hugging. almost all of whom owe me money still. And I went from commanding a special forces squadron to roaming around Brazil with a bunch of college kids, and also trying to write my first book. So I had a period of about 6 months where I tried to write a book. I did complete it and went through various edits. And it was actually an environmental, like an eco thriller, based on someone with a similar background to mine, who similarly fell into environmental security, in this case, working alongside indigenous people in Ecuador to protect their forests from oil development. And that was based on having an Ecuadorian friend who was a former Ecuadorian Marine who was absolutely engaged in that himself. So it was a pretty decent book. But then my first son came along, and I realized how little you might well be, or most likely will be paid for your book, even if you get published. And at the same time, I was offered a job by an oil and gas company. Yeah, I followed the money, sadly, but it's still there. It may see the light of day one day. And then I've also written a book with my wife. She and I have written a book about how we met in Paris 20 years ago from two different perspectives, alternating chapters. I won't go into it now, but it's really quite the romantic story, and not just because it was in Paris. I would love, in my retirement, to pick up the eco-thriller genre and get back into that. Green James Bond.
Green James Bond. I love it. And I think that's where we should wrap this up. Christian, I've really enjoyed speaking with you today. I think you're a fascinating person. I hope you do actually get that book published sooner rather than later. I want to thank you for your time, for trusting Acclimate, for the work that we do with you all. And just thank you. It was great to talk with you.
I've really enjoyed it. As anyone in the company will tell you, if you give me an inch as far as talking about the environment, I'll take a mile. It's within everything that I do at Concentric, it's the bit that it excites me the most, that I feel most fulfilled by. So this, I saw in my calendar, I got a whole hour to talk about this stuff. Wonderful. And it's been wonderful. Thank you, Mike.
Well, great. Well, thank you.